What? That's a yes. All right. How many of you are here for your first time tonight? All right. Welcome, guys. My name is Jackie Medcalf, and I'm the founder and executive director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance, and we're home to the Jacinto River Coalition. In short, we work to protect public health and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic waste. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit and use a couple of different methods to bring about change that our communities believe needs to take place. So we're just going to get right into it tonight. If you did not get an agenda, we have some at the front. I believe probably several of y'all did not because I was late and I had the agendas. Raise your hand if you need an agenda. Oh, yes. Okay. My team's going to come around with agendas. So some big news. Many of you have been here for years with us, and you are used to this turnover every time we get a new president. And sometimes, many times, when we get a new president, we get new leadership within the Environmental Protection Agency. And pretty quickly, quicker than I've seen before, the president appointed the EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, and hey, Rachel, we need some on this side. And they've also recently appointed the administrator for Region 6, which is the southern, 5 southern states, and yes, I think over 50 tribal territories. So these two are our decision makers. When we think about who has the power to do what we need in this cleanup, these are the two guys that need to be hearing from us. And some more information about the two is on the back of your agenda, as is their mailing address. Just in short, the record of decision outlining the cleanup on the north pits, or on the waste pits in total, was made by the administrator under Administrator Trump's last presidency. The southern site got cleaned up down to 10 feet during the Biden administration, but no big decisions were made on the northern pit in the last 4 years. And if you want to send them a letter and say, finish what you started, or hey, our community needs you, or anything you can think of, here's their address. If you want to talk through what you would like to say, give us a call, send us an email. We're happy to support you. We do have some petitions we'll pass around later, but I encourage you for these guys to be hearing from you. When Hurricane Harvey happened, the waste pits was all over national news. And it's because many of you had been raising your voices about the threats at that site. All right, so we're not going to go through much historical information. We are going to dive into the 100% design tonight. And for those of you that are newer to this, several years ago, the responsible parties produced a report that was supposed to be the near final plan on how they were going to execute the cleanup as ordered. And that had some really big issues. For example, they had totally left out how they were going to clean up a portion of this northern waste pit. So this is the northern waste pit here. This is the sand separation area, and this is the southern impoundment. This is the area that was remediated down to 10 feet. So the EPA, several years ago, sent the companies a notice. It was technically called a notice of takeover, but it was saying, hey, this report you have produced, this plan is seriously deficient. If you don't remedy these things that we've outlined, we have the authority, legally, the authority to take this site over. And then the parties produced what was 100% design, should be a full, complete, biddable design, ready to bid for construction. The EPA said, nope, you missed the mark. We're going to give you more time. We're going to give you another chance. So on that last 100% design, we submitted the most extensive comments that we have ever submitted on any plan to date, and we have been involved in this site for over 10 years. And the latest plan was sent to us in January of this year. And so my team and I reviewed much of the material, and we compared the points that we commented on in the last attempt to see, were our comments, many of them were concerns that you all brought, were they remedied? Were they satisfied? Did they address them? And sadly, as I went through the spreadsheets of our comments and our questions and the column that said, was this addressed? Over 95% was no. So our overall conclusion is that it is still deficient. So in the last go around, there were over 1,000 comments submitted from the EPA and the stakeholders to the responsible parties. We're going to be submitting our comments in about a week. So we're holding this meeting tonight to talk with you all about some of the points we feel we need to hear from you on, we want you to be aware of. There are far too many points to be able to talk about in 1 hour. So we picked some of the ones we know folks around here care about. I'm going to cover a couple of the topics, and my team members will cover some as well. So first of all, the timeline has been a big discussion over the years. Many residents were asking for best management practices, emergency plans, mitigation efforts to be put in place so that if a storm happens while they're out there removing this material, there's a plan in place, there's materials in place. We know what's going to happen in an emergency scenario. The responsible parties took that and they ran with it. And they said, oh, to facilitate community concerns, we're only going to work half the year. Well, we're only going to remove material half the year. They'll do other stuff, but not removal of material. So when the record of decision was signed in 2017, it said the amount of material to be removed up to a cleanup standard safe for a child to be in the river in 2.5 years. Well, the responsible parties have stretched that to 7. The EPA entertained that for a while. In recent time, they've been aligning with us and pushing back and saying, you know, 7's a bit unreasonable, guys. And in this latest version of the design, for the first time in years, the responsible parties said we are willing to work year-round if the EPA makes us.
Yep.
Gosh.
What a child.
So, EPA, balls in your court. Like finally, they're actually saying this, which this is just it's just wild. That point is in the petition that we have for you all tonight. So to look at this in an aerial view, this is the northern pit outlined by a cofferdam wall. There'll be a double cofferdam wall backfilled in the middle. And then there will be a structure out here that will be a protection, an extra layer of protection, should a barge go towards the pit again. I'm sorry?
Not should, when.
When, you're right. Yeah, when. It already happened, right? So, yeah, when. Absolutely right. And the overlay green is indicating the areas of waste that will be removed. So the wall, this is a big point that I want to hear from you all tonight. You hear us say BMP, the responsible parties, decided to call the wall best management practices. So the BMP is the wall. It's the confining wall. And so something that they have brought up in this design is that over time, the sheet piling will corrode and there will be loss of the sheet piling. And they're planning to go down about 70 feet into the riverbed. So they're concerned that they won't be able to pull all of the sheet pile up. Now let me just back up and say, over the years, I have watched concerns get brought up that just delay and shortchange the process. And then a solution that does both of those as well. Early on, the responsible parties wanted to leave the cofferdam in the river. The Port of Houston, the EPA, and others pushed back and said, no, we don't think that's a good idea. And so it is so that they are not to leave most of the cofferdam in the river. So now they're claiming there's a problem, which we know is a real problem, but now they're bringing up this problem of corrosion. And that if they start to have loss in that sheet piling, they won't be able to pull it out. So if they can't pull it out, they want to cut it off and then push it below ground surface. Many of us have watched the river change a lot over time, but also the pipelines. Part of the concern and the argument around not putting the sheet piling deeper to make it higher above the river water was because they couldn't go deeper because of the pipelines. But now, if they say they can't pull it up and out, they want to push it deeper. So, I'm curious as to what y'all's thoughts are, and I've heard some depth bounce around over the years about the pipelines. I know Lyndale has a big meeting coming up where they'll talk about pipelines, but is it 90 feet? Do y'all think that the pipelines are 90 feet below ground surface?
I think it's 70.
70?
70 below the surface of the river.
Huh. Okay.
But at 70 feet below the surface of the river, at what point in time?
Sure.
Because the river is different now from way back when.
Sea level's still sea level.
Yeah, but if you washed away or drug in stuff, it changes the depth. Correct?
Yeah, but it's still from the surface of the water down 70 feet. That's not going to change. Just because the riverbed changes doesn't mean that the depth of the pipes moved.
Lisa?
So, I don't think I'm the only one here who recalls what happened in '94.
Yeah.
When some of the pipelines started floating and broke and exploded and caught the river on fire. Now, these pipelines, and I recall the deepening and widening of the ship channel each time. That's been a big issue as well. We should know where they are.
Right.
And
They do.
so, not just we, but, yeah, Carolyn raises an issue. You know, okay, they may be 180 feet below sea level, you know, or 100 feet below sea level, but then as the river scours or adds, that's going to, while they stay the same, the distance below the sand, the bottom, is going to change. I would think EPA, as much as anybody, really want to avoid interfering with the pipeline. So I think it's an important issue to raise. I don't know if it's an issue at this site or not. And I would hope that between the EPA and some other agencies, we should be able to get clear answers to those questions if we don't have them already.
Yes, sir.
I don't believe that I remember there being any pipelines in the vicinity of the bridge that crossed through that pit area.
Oh, yeah, they go right under it.
There are? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
because that's another problem
Right
they're
under
having
it.
designing the new bridges is so that they don't put pilings in where
So the
pipes are.
pipelines are right under it?
oh,
Yeah.
right near.
Yeah, the
Right,
pipelines,
right, yeah.
you know, I wish that we could just know where they are, but yeah, at some point, they are right in this area.
They're underneath
Okay.
the service
That's my
road that goes right
understanding
in front of
anyways.
them.
So if we are going 70 feet deep with the pilings, that is a concern because they're not often to know exactly.
They should do some sonar
They
testing.
should be able to do some evaluation.
Exxon knows where they're
Yes,
at.
Mr. Hennigan.
Okay, show us again on this where the existing pilings are.
There aren't any.
They go right
There are.
behind the house.
Right. No, there aren't any.
Yeah,
So this
They-
is,
they can
this is
survey
the pit
everything
here.
out Pretty close,
they should.
yeah.
The pilings are to be driven.
Uh-huh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, you were showing old ones, and I just want to make sure there's no existing ones they're talking about.
Mm-mm. No, none that are existing. So this is definitely something that we will be commenting on. We're concerned about it. I hope that the EPA will also be commenting as well as other stakeholders. Because there's been a lot of talk about, no, you cannot leave the cofferdam there. So now this is a new discussion of how they could leave it there. So another item is the TxDOT right-of-way. So this is nothing new, but it's still not resolved. So here's the northern pit, and this will be the route that the trucks take to get to and from the site. And there's the right-of-way right here that is TxDOT's right-of-way. And they will be replacing the bridge at the same time that this construction is going on. So over time, there's been discussion about widening that right-of-way, and they have altered the design for that containment area based on this. And so they still have not come to final agreements on this though. After all these years, we've been hearing about this for years, the access and the right-of-way and double construction traffic on a little road. But they still have not come to an agreement. And it does not appear from everything that we have seen that there's a plan B. And so, you know, we're really concerned about not having a backup plan, and that after all this time, they haven't reached any agreement. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, they could stop stalling on getting work started on the work, and then be finished before the state starts the project.
I kind of feel like it's kind of their plan to start then, and then they can delay more according to whatever their TxDOT is doing. It's kind of like, you know, oh, we can buy more time if we do it in a couple years when they're getting ready to do everything, and then they'll put us on hold.
They could do it. This stuff that's going on right now, that's affecting the traffic, that's TxDOT, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I've had people approach me and saying, well, the river's doing the thing, you know. I said, no, or the pits. I said, no. I said, that hasn't started yet.
Right, yeah, there's a fair amount of different
That's
types of
TxDOT
surveys and
testing.
things, yeah,
Or
going
they're
on.
doing ground samples to
Yeah.
check the soil for putting the piers
I
in.
figured that's what it was.
Yeah, they're-
Because they have to widen the bridge and everything.
Yeah.
They're not testing what the soil samples that
It's a pain in
the dirt that they're pulling out now, their shaft things, they're not testing it for toxins. They're just testing it to see what kind of dirt it is.
right.
See if they'll
See
hold
how-
the bridge.
So-
How strong it.
They're pulling up toxic dirt without testing it or any safety equipment on their guys.
Yeah, we've definitely been looking into that, and the photos that you guys send are certainly helpful to be able to demonstrate the activities. Okay, so the next item that I want to discuss with you all tonight is the confirmation sampling. And so the confirmation sampling is essentially the sampling of material to make sure that they have got all of the contaminated material removed, or that they have removed down to the goal of the cleanup, which is 30 parts per trillion. So we showed you this graphic here blown up several months ago when we were going through the plan the last time, and we were just baffled at how they wanted to do this testing. So the way they're going to do the confirmation sampling first in terms of process, they're going to bore into the pit before they start excavation so that they can give the construction workers a plan of the depths that they're going to be going down to. Then when they get to those depths, there will also be sampling. But what they saw at the southern pit was being able to hand over, the plans to the construction teams saying clean up down to 10 feet. They were able to clean up that site in just over a year, remove the material in just over a year. A substantial amount of material, 150,000 cubic yards. And so thousands of truckloads. And so they want to use that same method here to be able to move quicker. But our concern is, of course, will they have gotten it all? So there will be testing after as well. Now, each load that the disposal facility receives of the waste has to have waste that is characterized, meaning is it hazardous, is it not, is it construction waste, like what are they classifying that as? And each truckload will have, the manifest of information of what exactly is in there. And we're seeing some inconsistency. In the record of decision, the contaminants to be cleaned up are dioxin, furans, and PCBs. But it's inconsistent throughout the document where they talk about PCBs. PCBs are really the non-negotiable ones here. If they are above a certain threshold, they are hazardous, and it has to go to a hazardous landfill. So we're certainly keeping a keen eye on PCBs being included in this process because it's in the record of decision. Where they're there, we know they're there. So how they want to do this confirmation sampling is they are going to divide the pits up into decision units, about ½ acre or so decision units. And from there, they will take multiple samples. They'll then combine those samples. This is called composite sampling. They'll then combine those samples, take a portion of that for analysis in the lab. Now, the concern is you dilute the data. So they say, the responsible parties in their plan, they say, if we get a composite result that indicates there's still waste there, then we're going to go back and analyze all those individual samples that they started out with to figure out where that hot spot was. To us, one, we're not a fan of composite sampling. We don't support it here. Two, if you're going to collect the samples, run the samples. They would rather store them in the lab, take the time to run it in a much smaller version, and then if they get a hot read, then take the time to then go back and reanalyze. It's a waste of time, in our opinion. And we just simply cannot support this method. And we hope that others, EPA, other stakeholders, will ask for point-by-point analysis, because we are not exposed on an average of an area. We are exposed on a point-by-point basis. Therefore, we should know that this point is clean and that point is clean and that it's not averaged out.
Jackie,
Yes.
historically, it's already been proven that spot by spot has different toxicity levels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And different depths of toxicity. So based on what has historically already been proven, that should be our argument as to why there should be no composite testing whatsoever, because it's already been outruled. I mean, it's already been shown not to be accurate So based on what historically has already been found, that shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah,
And-
you're right.
And there should be too, at least a initial depth of a considerable amount put in place, because they started out and they tested this tiny layer and it didn't have anything. Then they went down further and they found an enormous amount. And that varied by spot too. So you
Yeah.
can't just take a surface sample and see if it's not a pocket a little, to me.
Yeah,
I'm not a
you're right.
geologist.
No, you're right. If you look at a map, of the borings, and they break it down mostly by foot intervals, and so you can see how you might have several feet of no waste material, and then waste material below. And so that's a good point that we should definitely bring up in the comments about how it varies by depth and location. On that point, on the conversation of the importance of knowing that point by point of this material is cleaned, our environmental outreach coordinator, Christy, is now going to talk with you all about the remedial action objective related to benthos, which I've learned a lot about this from Christy. She majored in biology and actually did some pretty extensive research in the area on the benthic environment. So she's going to talk to us about the remedial action objective that has to do with the smallest living things in the river. Thank you.
Can y'all hear me okay? All right, great. So the remedial action objective is basically there's going to be 4 objectives in this design that we read. The one that I'm going to be discussing is objective 4, and this is to meet the objective of protecting the human health and the environment. And this also goes into say with the benthetic organisms. These are the organisms that live in the top layer of the sediment. So these organisms can vary from segmented worms to the ones that are floating around, such as like a fiddler crab. As you can see here, as I just said, they are the ones that are living in the top layer of the bay, which could be the bay, could be a pond. It just varies. This is where they are generally. And as you can see with the ruler here, you can see how small these organisms are, and you can see that they live on or in the sediment. And the types of benthos that there are the plants, the invertebrates, and the fish, which are the ones that live on the sediment. Sorry about that. So these little critters are impacted. If they're impacted, our food web is impacted. Just so if algae is impacted, these are impacted. It's a very big cycle. It's the cycle of life. This is the cycle of the estuary and what needs to be done and how these little critters do need to be protected. These are a viable source for the fish and birds. So if these creatures are living in the sediment, which is affected by pollution, there's going to be less of them. So if there's going to be less of them, they're going to be affecting the food web, so there's going to be less birds, there's going to be fish, and then we're going to eat the fish. We're going to be around the birds. If we eat the fish, we're going to be consuming the dioxin or whatever the species is in. And there's also going to be less of them. There's only one of these segmented worms that are prone to be around pollution a little more, and those are aucleochetes. And they're very micro, or like very micro, very, very small. Under a microscope, you have to see them. And that's what starts this. So if the sediment is damaged, that's damaging the benthetic organisms, that's damaging the fish, that's damaging the birds, that's damaging, I can keep going. So it's not good, and this is something that we do need to bring up and that we have brought up in the remedial action comments back to the EPA, that they aren't as concerned about it as they need to be, because this is something that can affect the benthetic community. And I'm going to pass it on to Victoria. She is our community coordinator.
Okay, can you hear me okay? It's just picking me up. All right, as she said, my name is Victoria, and I'm going to talk to y'all about the plans for the sand separation area. Just want to make sure I'm not covering the projector. So the sand separation area is where it's outlined. Does this have a pointer? Right here. So the red outline, it is the sand separation area, as you can see in this map. And this is the area where historically with sand mining operations, the sand was separated from the dredge material. So the plan proposed for this area is what we call modern natural recovery. Sometimes you'll hear it referred as M&R. So through the design, there's a lot of talk about M&R, and that's what it stands for. And what it basically means is that the waste here is not being removed, but it's being left there to be monitored over time. Now, the rationale or the reasoning behind why this remedy was picked for this area is because relatively, the concentrations of contaminants of dioxins and furans in this area was relatively low in comparison to the rest of the site. And this is a depositional area of the river, meaning that sediment is constantly being accumulated at the bottom. And so the expectation or the hope is that over time, enough sediment will naturally accumulate and create a sort of cover or barrier between the contaminated sediment and the organisms. The plan in itself, the Modern Natural Recovery Plan, has two main components. So one is monitoring, obviously, and then the other part is institutional controls. Now, what institutional controls are, they may be requirements that could, or we hope, that would limit the use of the area to things like fleeting activities, dredging, recreational use. And for example, if you see this image, you can already see, and I know many of you already know this, the outline right here that's orange is actually the property of Houston Fleeting Services, and it directly overlaps with the sand separation area. And we're going to talk a little bit more about institutional controls in the next slide as well. But I want to talk about monitoring. And the proposed plan for monitoring is that there will be 4 sampling events, so 4 different times in which samples will be collected and analyzed to see what the concentrations of contaminants are. And so those 4 sampling events are one time prior to beginning the remedial action, one time within a year of starting that remedial action, one time within 3 years, and then once 5 years after the remedial action has finished. I must also note that the 5-year review for the solder impoundment, which has already begun, is due to be released in 2027, and that 5-year review should include some sampling from both the northern impoundment and the sand separation area as well. And so the big question with all of this is, how will it be determined whether that remedy is protective and it's performing as required? Before I move on, I should also mention that if the 5-year review determines that it is not performing as expected or as required, then this whole modern natural recovery plan would need to be reevaluated. So to talk about how we're going to have the determination, let's talk about a little bit about sampling. And you can see here, each one of these dots, the yellow dots, are where samples will be collected. And these are the same areas where it has been sampled before for the pre-design investigation. So Jackie already talked a little bit about composite sampling, which is going to help us a lot here, because that's exactly what the plan in the sand separation area is too. So the proposal is that for each of these quadrants, there's 9 different quadrants or different sections. There's gonna be five samples collected from each of those squares. And at different depth intervals. So 0 to 15 centimeters, 15 to 30 centimeters, 30 to 45, and 45 to 60. 60 centimeters is as deep as they're gonna sample. Now for each of those intervals, they're gonna combine those 5 samples and say, okay, for 0 to 15 centimeters, this is the combined sample for this quadrant. And so they're gonna do that for all 9 quadrants, and then they're gonna have 9 samples for each depth. Now, what they're gonna be actually looking at is the average of those 9 samples. So we're gonna have an average for what's the concentrations at 0 to 15 centimeters, an average of what's the concentration at 15 to 30, and so on and so forth. We have already made our position clear that we do not support this method of sampling, and neither did the EPA. They actually made it very clear in their comments, and I put exactly the comment they made. It's like word by word here on the slide, comment number 133, where they said they do not support that method of sampling for the sand separation area because you could very easily miss any hot spots. It's interesting too, in EPA's comment at the very bottom, they mention, although we disagree with using this method, we disagree with it even though this whole area is covered by the institutional controls. And the whole reason they mention institutional controls at all there is because the way that the responsible parties have justified up until this point the use of the average is they're saying, well, the whole area is covered by institutional controls. So presumably there should be, or we would hope there would be some protections to this area regardless. So, the logic that they're utilizing is, in that case, it's okay to just use the average since everything should be protected under the institutional controls. However, at this point in time, we don't know exactly what the institutional controls will be, and we don't have a clear timeline of how long it's going to take to implement them. Typically, institutional controls do take a pretty good amount of time to be implemented successfully. So this is not giving us a lot of security in this plan. And the last thing I want to say about this section is that why it's so important that we have a good plan on how they're going to determine what the concentrations are and how let me backtrack. Okay. The whole reason why this is so important that they have a good method for determining what the concentrations are is because that's what they're using as the base to decide for how long are they going to monitor. Right now, the plan that they're proposing is monitoring for the proposed timeline that I just spoke about, and whenever they do 2 consecutive sampling events in which the concentrations come back below 30 parts per trillion, then that would mean we're good. No more sampling is needed. But with only looking at the average, we're risking missing a lot of information. So that is the basic overlook of what the sand separation area plan entails. And I'll be here for any questions that you have. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jackie. Thank you so much.
Did you all catch on the first slide Victoria showed the fleeting area right over the sand separation area? Okay. So, while we're talking about fleeting, barges are an issue around here and on the river, and something that many of you care about. And before I go into the next item, which is the petition, I wanted to give you all an update. Most of you are aware that in the fourth quarter of last year, we filed suit against the Army Corps of Engineers. Many of you have been involved in the years of pushing back on a permitting process or lack thereof for a facility in the river bottom. And after the Army Corps of Engineers ignoring all of the voices, all of the comments and concerns that were raised to them, and shortchanging the process, their own rules, we decided to file suit. And we did just receive an update that they are requesting a 30-day extension to respond to us. So hopefully here in the near future, we will have some more information to update you all on. But there is movement, a request for a delay, so we'll keep you posted. Okay, so the petition. As I mentioned, it's brief, and I struggled with figuring, do we do letters, individual letters, do we do petitions? Because there's just so much that I feel that we could all say. I figured as a collective we would do a brief petition that was to the point and summarized, you know, the key items. So saying we, the undersigned, ask the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that the cleanup of the San Jacinto River Waste Pit Superfund site moves expeditiously with integrity and full protection for our environment and our communities. Our river provides us with recreation and is a food source in addition to being one of the major freshwater sources for Galveston Bay. And we just have to keep going with the message, you know, this is your community. You want it cleaned up. You want it out of the river for whatever your specific reason is. So my team's going to pass around petitions. Please consider signing one if you support this. Yes?
I think that something that needs to be added and thought about seriously is, that's great that they're going to clean up the waste, but where are they taking it? And how are they classifying it? And it seems like, you know, California, all these places want their toxic waste cleaned up right now, but nobody ever stops to say, where's that going? And how are they storing it?
Yeah, so that has to do with the component earlier about the classification of the waste. That determines where it's going, how it's being stored. So those details hinge on how they test that material before it goes off-site. So at the southern site, because a dioxin test typically takes about 2 weeks to get back. You can rush it, but it takes time to get back from the lab. And so they have to remove the waste material, but then they have to stage it and store it. And that was done at the southern site, but a lot of this at the northern site in this design, and this is a big issue we have, is they're leaving it up to the remedial contractor to decide. Now, granted, I understand there are some things that the construction people know best, right? But there's an awful lot. And when we've asked the EPA about this for the northern, it's that that portion as well is being left up to the remedial contractor. So, we're definitely paying attention to that. EPA knows we're paying attention to that. We've had conversations with them about that. Lisa?
I think one thing to add here is the perfect solution to this was for it to never have happened.
Yeah.
For that waste never to have been put in the river. And so, unfortunately, we are trying to choose the least worst option. I almost hate to put it that way, but if you're going to say an option isn't perfect, then you are foreclosing every option and delaying it forever, which is not what we want to do. So where's the waste right now? It's in the middle of a dynamic river where people get their seafood from. which I don't think is where any of us want it to be. Now, at this point, since it's there and created, is there a perfect place to put it? No. But if you've got a lined and monitored, permitted landfill of some sort that has differing types of restrictions for differing types of waste, I would argue that's a much safer place for it to be than in the middle of a river where people swim and eat the fish. Now, it's a challenge. I mean, we live in an imperfect world. Nothing's going to be perfect. Yeah, but I think that needs to come into mind because, yeah, there are a lot of challenges. If we do not want to put on another neighborhood what we've been fighting with for more than decades now. So I do appreciate the concerns, but I also think we need to be aware of no place is perfect, and a fully lined, monitored, licensed landfill is probably going to be a better place than it is now.
Yeah, and on that, the truck wash is something that we've all pushed hard for over the years. That was implemented at the southern site. That will be implemented at this site as well. For the trucks leaving this site, it's a pretty easy on and off. I think they've got one stop sign, maybe two. Two stop signs before they get on the highway, depending which way they're going. But we don't know about where it's going, right? We don't know what that looks like in terms of, are there neighborhoods, are there schools, are there things that need to be part of that discussion. We're just not sure at this time.
Question, of course.
Yeah.
Just clarification. When Victoria was speaking, she was saying the monitoring, the depths that they were going to go down to.
Right.
3 centimeters. For me, because either I'm thinking of it wrong or it's awful shallow that they're going to be testing. Centimeters, English conversion?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's like 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, I think is my recollection.
Inches, feet?
Sorry, feet.
Feet. Okay, I'm thinking inches. So,
Okay.
feet. Okay, that was it. And then my other thing is, they're talking about institutional controls over that. That area is in a fluid environment. It's got water going over it. Part of it has barges going over it. Before it's all said and done with, all of it will have barges and other watercraft that could be going, even if barges aren't there, other watercraft going over. So a very fluid environment. So how do you put an institutional control on something that is constantly moving?
Yeah, and it only takes one big hurricane, one big storm,
So,
one
A little
accident
more
out there,
subsidence.
yeah, or more
A little more subsidence.
Yeah, yeah,
So-
60 centimeters is 2 feet.
okay.
2 feet, that's not very deep.
Yeah. The total depth is from 0 to 2 feet.
That's, to me, personally, they need to be going deeper
Yeah.
than that. That's what I was thinking. That sounds like, I'm thinking 15 inches, about 15 inches of what it was. So,
I know historically they've looked, I think, down to 8 or 9 feet there. But yeah, we'll definitely make sure we're paying attention to that in our comments regarding the depth.
I mean,
There-
even on the southern impoundments, they went down 10 feet. I don't
Right.
think that was enough, but 10 feet. So, that's just awful shallow to me.
There's, this right here is the hot spot. And so that's another problem with the averaging. There's one area, so all of these areas in the testing that they did showed to be gaining sediment. They're all depositional environments. But this one right here showed to be actually losing sediment, eroding.
Which is
And it
moving.
happens to be the exact same polygon that had the highest concentration of dioxin. So it's certainly something that we're not letting up on. Okay, so the cancer assessment that Department of State Health Services did for our communities, looking at data from 1995 to 2012, is going to be updated. I have been waiting for the state to release that since what they called late summer of last year. So that was the deadline that they said they would have the report released to us by. We're still waiting. I email them almost every week and make sure that they know that we are still waiting for that study. So they have done the study, but it's an update. So it's from 2013 to 2021. And because of all of the health surveys that residents have filled out over the years, we have added additional cancer types. So the first study was 17 cancer types. This is the study area here. And basically Lake Houston Bridge to 146, or Fred Hartman. And so any of the census tracts, this is the track of the river here. This is the bend. This is the waste pits. And this is I-10. So any of these census tracts in red had at least one type of cancer that came back abnormally high. This study will look at all of the same 17 plus some additional cancers. Now, we just need to get the state to release it. It is in executive review, and it has been tied up in review by the state agency's executives for months, and they're sitting on it. And I won't speculate, so I will say I don't know why they have not released that study. But I think it's time, for some of our elected officials to start nudging them and for us to get that information. I believe it's the community's information. It should live with the community. So just to give you that update. All right. Any additional questions? Yes, Greg.
So, she said on the southern site that the testing is going to be the 5-year testing in 2027.
Yeah.
So when are they going to release the institutional controls for that site?
So the testing will start before 2027. So that's when we believe that they will actually produce the report that has all the information for the 5-year review. Robert, the remedial project manager, said at the community meeting here that they've already started doing work on the 5-year review, but it'll all be produced in 2027. And then the institutional controls is something that has to be negotiated. So here's an example. The southern site has been remediated as outlined in the record of decision, but they have yet to agree and negotiate on institutional controls with the responsible parties. So there are not institutional controls in place yet for the southern site. So, it can take time.
I just wonder, Musgrove's trying to get, Kirby's wanting to use that land, and they, he can't lease it to them until they come up with some kind of rules for using it.
Well,
I mean, somebody got to...
Victoria didn't necessarily share some upsetting news, but there's a site that the responsible parties use to compare the sand separation area, and I know you're talking about the southern pit here, and they've taken over 20 years, or right at 20 years, and they still have not finished their negotiations for institutional controls.
Really?
Yeah. But
well, you tell him that, because he's going to have a stroke if I tell him.
It's not to say that will happen here, but it can take a really long time. But, the EPA has the authority. They have the legal authority. They need the will to use their authority, and they can make these decisions.
And that brings to the point, institutional controls of that. It's been 20 years and on the sand separation area. And there's barge fleeting being done on top of it. So apparently it's not unusable because they have come in and they're using it.
Yeah.
So before one is ever put in place, that whole area could be used for something else. Have all the barges on it, have the dredging going on to accommodate the barges, Same thing with the sand separation area. There's no controls over it, so they can do anything they want to on it at the present moment. Until there's a control put in place, and it may be too late to put a control in place by the time that they do it. So that's a way of bypassing institutional control, in my opinion.
You're right. Yeah, I never looked at it quite like that. And then what could go on during that time.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
good
it's
point, Carolyn.
occurring right now. It's not theoretical, it's being, it's example.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's a real-time occurrence. And as we see, those areas just keep growing and growing. So if there's no control, that's their basis. There's no institutional control in place. Therefore, there's nothing to prohibit us from doing whatever. So,
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Of course she does.
Yeah. Last but not least,
So I have a couple things to say real quick.
time's up.
This is, you can see, you can scan your phone with the health sheet information. And why is this important to us? Because it's what we do. We collect the health information and associate it with the environment. That's how THEA got started, Texas Health Environment Alliance. So these sheets are super important. I have them out on the table, or you can scan this scan. Why is it important for us to know your health? We're not going to go give that to the masses. Nobody's going to see it but us, but THEA.
Not her.
Not me, but THEA. Not allowed to see it, but it is kept very
Only like two
confidential
of us, I promise.
to THEA. And there is a list, and I actually helped make this sheet many, many years ago. There are many illnesses that we list that are in the area that we know are associated to dioxin. But this is super important to what we do. If you have neighbors or friends that might be ill, ask them if they would go online and, answer this as well. The more that we know about the health in this town, the more that THEA can help you. With that being said, there is a doctor, and her little cards are up here on the table. The reason I talk about this particular doctor, I feel she saved my daughter's life and several of our coalition members' lives. She is Dr. Kelly Wilson. She's in the Med Center. Why is she so important? She understands the effects of chemicals on the body. So she knows where to look for certain illnesses that maybe other doctors don't understand that are associated to the chemicals that we live around. She's found tumors in people that other doctors didn't find. She's currently working with my daughter right now. She's amazing, and that's why I always have her cards out on the table. Nothing in it for us other than letting the women know. I use her as a general practitioner. She's amazing. She has her own compounding lab in her office, as well as they can take your blood right in her office. So she's just amazing, and so that's why I always have her cards out. And the other thing, I just wanted to thank the people that show up. There's a lot of people that have been coming for a decade. Greg Moss, Sarah, the Bobos. I can name you guys, the Hennigans. I can name the people by name. They show up, they come, they are seriously helping get this dioxin removed out of this town, and without them, we couldn't do it. If people didn't come to this meeting, we couldn't do what we do. We have to have signatures, we have to have people on board, and the more people we get, the more excited we get about them doing what they have to do, they're going to listen. The APA actually said at the last meeting, there is no other community like Highlands. That didn't just happen. That has been years in the making, and people putting their hard work and effort and volunteering. That's how this happened. People not giving up. So don't give up. Please attend. Tell your friends and neighbors. If you leave here, go tell 5 people that live around you. That way then more people know and more people can hear. So I'm just saying thank you for coming. It's important. Thanks for showing up.
a question. On the health report, if you've already filled it out in the past, are y'all wanting new ones?
If you have new issues or new things that have been arising, or even if you maybe have a neighbor that has died of a certain cancer or your animals, please include that. That all of that stuff helps. Yeah. Thank you.
Lisa?
The one thing I will add to that, and thank you, because yeah, it is people communicating with the agencies that keep them accountable. And at some of these sites, if you've only got 3 or 4 people raising concerns, even if they know exactly what they're talking about, you're not necessarily going to get the agency to make a decision that is really protective of the citizenry.
Because they think that people just don't care.
Well, that, and it's the easier decision because
Yeah.
almost always you're going to have an applicant who is going to be putting pressure on, or somebody who's going to have to pay some money, who has more resources to raise their voice.
Right. So by showing up, you're literally getting that
But
dioxin.
I just also want to raise, we've got a petition that's been going around, and petitions do let elected officials know that there's an issue. In getting the record of decision several years ago, the fact that Jackie and a variety of others, many of them here, were able to persuade every congressional member in Harris County that removing the race was the appropriate step, I think was critical in the right result.
And Pruitt even showed up on the
But
fence.
I would also
To meet her.
encourage anybody who really has the time and resources and who cares to also separately reach out to EPA with these messages and your private concerns, because the more they hear, and the more your elected officials hear, bipartisan, these are my concerns for my health and safety.
And so
It
are
makes a
we allowed to
difference.
call them on the phone anymore?
Who?
The EPA?
Oh, yeah.
Can we just pick up the
Yeah.
phone and call?
EPA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure.
I mean, if they're an elected official or an agency, now they have some things like conflict of interest issues
Yeah.
to bring into play, which I really don't think apply to citizenry like us who aren't wanting a governmental contract that will pay us. That's what raises some of the conflict of interest issues. But I mean, particularly our elected officials and the key people at agencies, we're their employers. And if they think there's a reason we shouldn't be contacting them, let them tell us and explain it.
Yeah, we have been hearing back. I know there's, a lot of stuff people hear in the news and a lot of stuff happening. But we have been hearing back from EPA via email. We got worried. There was a little bit of time, like a week or two, where we weren't hearing back on
Right.
this site. We were on another site, but not on this site. We were like, oh gosh. But then we started hearing back, numerous emails coming in. So the only thing, and we have seen an EPA member sit on a panel in 5th Ward last week. So EPA is continuing to even come down and travel and be in person. The only thing a little odd right now is every time I've tried to call the remedial project manager for this site, his phone's been off. That's never happened. So I don't know, maybe I'm calling when he's like on the plane or in a meeting, or maybe it's a coincidence, but that's just been a little odd. But he has been communicative prior to this week via email. So we are there still communicating. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next time.